Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 7th talk of the Only One Theme series. Today's talk is on only startups, and today we have Dr. Premnath here who will be delivering the talk. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Premnath. Dr. Premnath is Scientist, Polymer Science and Engineering Division at NCL and Founder Director at Venture Center. He is a technology developer, innovation and incubation manager, startup mentor, and a co-founder of 2 medtech startups. One of his inventions, a breakthrough material for hip and knee joint replacements, has been implanted in more than 1 million patients worldwide. Another technology for porous maxillo-facial implants has been implanted in thousands of patients in India and abroad. Dr. Premnath has provided leadership for teams that have won national awards for technology development, intellectual property management, and business incubation. He is a chemical engineer from IIT-Bombay and an alumnus of MIT in the US. Recently has received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from IIT-Bombay. He has also been a Chevening Technology Enterprise Scholar in Cambridge, UK. With this brief introduction, welcome Dr. Premnath to the session and over to you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Mugdha. Let's get started. Am I visible and audible to everybody? Okay. So let's get going. So I'm going to talk today about startups. Under the theme and under this particular series, we are only taking up one theme at a time. So I'll leave the rest out and only focus on startups today. Let's keep it simple, and I'll try and address some basic issues and also give a recipe for how you can go about with creating your own startup. So let's get started. This is the agenda. What are startups? How are they different from other businesses? Why are startups generating so much excitement? And how to go about conceptualizing and building your own startup? So let's start by asking the question, what are startups? Very often, all of us hear a lot of people talking about startups. Some of them seem to call every new business that comes up as a startup. So I thought first I should clarify what a startup is, and then we can talk about a little, a certain specialized category of startups after that, right? So to begin, let's understand what a business is. So every business, invariably, whether it's small or not big, provides a solution to a problem or meets an unmet need. And there are always customers there who desire that solution and are willing to pay for it. And therefore, it creates a revenue model around that problem being solved for that particular customer. And that revenue model is expected over a period of time to cover its cost. In the beginning, an investor might cover its cost, but eventually it's expected that the money that it earns, the product, can cover the cost of making it, and therefore it makes a profit for the person who's running the business, right? So these are common elements of every business that you see around you, and there's nothing too surprising about it. But it's sometimes some people do find it surprising that every business is actually conceived around a problem that is to be solved. Okay, small or big, even the local thela that might be next to you on the roadside is also doing that, and they're providing the convenience of a solution next to you, right? So this is something which you should keep in mind for every business. Now let's look at examples. So there are different examples on this slide out here. On the left, you see slides are coming up. Yeah. Okay. So you can see Kinley, for example, a mineral water bottle company, and there is a certain problem solution that it solves, which I'll discuss. In the middle, there's Uber, and on the right, there's the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, right? So the first one, which is the Kinley water bottle, The unmet need is the easy access to potable water. By the way, I'm breaking it down so that some of you can also think about it when you think about your own business ideas. And the solution that they're offering is hopefully a trustworthy bottled purified water. So that's one solution. By the way, you could have other solutions for the same unmet need. If easy access to potable water was a problem, you could say pipe in water as well, right? Nothing stops you from doing that. Or you could put a water filter at every location and get potable water. Here, Kinley is offering a bottled purified water, and along with it comes a sense of they are creating a brand which represents trust, which people are willing to accept as trustworthy bottled purified water. Then there's a revenue model around it, and the revenue model here is sale of bottle of water, and the costs are covered in this case now by revenues. I'm sure when they were setting up the first plant, they would have invested money and they would have been in the red. But they grew out of it and started earning more than it cost to make the bottle of water, and therefore it is now profitable, right? From what I understand, they probably make more than 50% in profits, okay, on every bottle of water. On the other hand, Uber is a slightly different business. The unmet need here is easy, predictable transport from a location A to B. And that's what everybody wants to do. And the solution they are proposing is an app-based taxi hailing that you can hail taxis using an app. And the revenue model for them is commissions. On every trip, they earn something out of every journey that a taxi owner provides to a particular traveler. And how are the costs covered? They are, of course, a heavily invested company. So there are investments that are covering the costs. And the partners are covering the cost because the taxi drivers own the car very often. So they are bearing some part of the cost. And then you generate revenues which cover some of your cost as well, right? So here again, the same structure applies. There's an unmet need, there's a solution, there's a revenue model, and then there's a way by which costs are covered. In the case of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, you'll see that unmet need was a way to reduce COVID-19 risks. That is what a vaccine does in COVID-19, right? And the solution was a vaccine. There are other ways to reduce COVID-19 risks. A mask is an example of it, but here is one solution, which is a vaccine. And there's a revenue model, which is sale of a vial of vaccine. That's what they're selling, the vial. There could have been a slightly different revenue model also, but in this case, it chose to sell a vial of vaccine. And how were the costs covered here? The costs were covered here by the government giving forward purchase orders, right? And they're generating revenues which exceed the costs, right? So these are three different examples. And in this, all of these are businesses. Now let's see which are startups out here, right? So the next slide, please, right? So in startups, you will find that there are a few important features. First of all, startups are a category of businesses, which basically are high risk, high reward businesses, which are trying to get ahead fast, right? So there's an element of speed, ambition associated with startups, and you're trying to leapfrog or pole vault ahead in the game. And here, one important aspect you will find is that every startup focuses on a future opportunity. That means it is projecting an opportunity in the future, that this is going to be important and working towards it. And they come up, because it's a future and the future is uncertain, you will often end up coming up with a new way to solve the problem. And therefore, an innovation is often involved. And that whole process has to be systematically managed such that you reduce the risk progressively. And as you reduce the risk and the market picks up, it starts scaling. And so rapid scaling is another important element that you see in startups. And this scaling and the excitement of the scaling is, of course, the reason why you get higher returns in the first place for capital. And therefore, it raises what is called risk capital. So this high risk, high reward kind of money, which is chasing high rewards and willing to take high risks. And that is what you see as typically venture capital investments in such firms. So these are a few important elements of startups. Now, of the three companies we saw as businesses, let's look at which are startups here, right? So Uber and Pfizer-BioNTech, and BioNTech here being the startup, are clearly the startups out here. In Uber, the vision for the future was that nobody will want to own a car one day. That's the kind of future opportunity that they're imagining, right? That everybody will just rent a car because it will be so convenient, or it will be so easy to hire a car that there'll be no need to own it. And why would they not want to own it? Because it's just not capex efficient. That means you're investing money in a car, and most of the time the car is parked in a garage or outside, and you're not really using it. So all the money that you put in is not being really utilized. On the other hand, something that is being rented is utilized continuously, and there's better utilization of capital. So what is the innovation here, right? The innovation here is a business process innovation of how the business has been rearranged in such a manner that now the old game doesn't apply, and you're able to, you're able to call out a taxi, fix the prices, the location, all on an app, instead of having to negotiate, find the taxi, and so on and so forth, right? And this type that you will notice that this kind of a business is disruptive. It disrupts an existing system of economy, and is of course high risk, right? And the resourcing for all of these activities has come from venture capital investments and the partners who are the drivers in this business, who are investing in their own vehicles and so on and so forth. And therefore, they're able to offload, they're able to offset or spread the risk over a larger base. And therefore, they're able to undertake such risk. Now, let's take the case of BioNTech. In the case of BioNTech, actually, the vision is very imaginative, which is a vision of the human body itself manufacturing pharmaceutical molecules. It is not a factory doing it, but the human body doing it, right? So if you can imagine an mRNA causing the human body to produce the proteins it needs, that will be a completely different ballgame, right? But that was the vision that they got started with. And here there's clearly a technical invention involved. And technical invention is again very disruptive. It's going to change the whole biopharmaceutical industry at some point, because if this works flawlessly, many molecules which are today produced in large factories, which are highly regulated and so on and so forth, might actually not be relevant anymore. So how are the costs covered? So in this case, the costs were first covered by grants. BioNTech received several grants, following which there were venture capital investments. And then there were strategic partnerships like with Pfizer. And then there were forward purchase orders from the governments when they bet on mRNA vaccine during COVID, during the COVID pandemic. There was sovereign indemnity provided by the government. The government took some of the risks, right? And then now they're able to generate enough revenues to justify all that investment as well. So clearly, you can also notice that the kind of funding that was needed was very different and of a very different kind to deal with the kind of risks involved. It was not like using money, say that a typical company raises in a stock market or in say through a mutual fund and so on. Okay, next slide. Now, in this category, there's one more subcategory called science-based deep tech startups. And here, it is the whole opportunities are inspired by developments in science and technologies. And development in science, development in new technologies being deployed in different industries. And the novelties often are related to technical novelties or scientific inventions, right? And if you look at those three again, the only one that qualifies here is the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine then. Okay, so the BioNTech one is the science-based deep tech startup, or not Uber. It's a startup, but not necessarily a science-based deep tech startup, right? And just to illustrate the fact that science shapes the vision and also the ability to execute because of the inventions that come over. If you look at the timelines of the mRNA vaccine as shown in this chart, which is from an article in Nature that came in September 2021, you will notice that there was parallel development of the mRNA technology and science, and lipid-based delivery systems were also parallelly developing. Both were combined to produce products like vaccines in different stages. And as things developed, you started seeing the emergence of the first companies around, around 2000, right? That is CureVac being formed, BioNTech being formed in around 2008, and 2010 Moderna being formed, right? And a key, you will notice that all these people were keenly watching the developments in science. The foresight came by observing and being aware of science in action as it happens. And the awareness of possibilities, imagining the fact that you could produce proteins, protein therapeutics, vaccines within the human body itself with no need for biomanufacturing plants, that thought and that possibility, which we are realizing today, many of us, was imagined before itself by many people, right? And then, of course, enabled by some of the key inventions and parallel technology developments that were happening during that time. So what are the lessons here? We saw that every business has a problem and unmet need. And in startups, there's a foresight of a future which shapes that problem, which basically gives you a vision of what is an opportunity over there. There's a solution, and in startups, you often have some kind of innovation over there. There's a revenue model. There's a strategy for managing costs and uncertainties. And we should not live in a fool's paradise. Be clear that it is a high risk, high reward strategy whenever you look at startups, right? So you take risks because there's an opportunity for high rewards as well, right? So let me come to the next segment. But I want to tell you why startups are important, right? Startups are important for any country. It's important for India as well. Now in India, it's good that the country has noticed the importance of it. First of all, as I told you, startups are a very clear indicator of high growth aspirations. As a country which is aspiring to grow at a very high GDP growth rate, there's no other option but to look at high growth rate options like startups. Startups are also key to a society that wants to pole vault ahead. We want to break ahead of the crowd. And that is our aspiration as a country, and so it becomes important. And Dr. Michelka likes to call this as pole vault and not leapfrog, so I'll stay with that. The risk capital that innovation attracts is also drawing money away from less productive uses, for example, gold and so on and so forth. So that's another very useful activity that startups perform. They're building a case for drawing innovation financing, for drawing risk capital into things that can create useful products and services for the world. And beyond a point, in the Indian economy just cannot grow on factors and efficiency. For example, just by increasing the number of people, you can grow that much. By increasing the number of productive people, you can grow that much. You can grow that much by increasing, say, the oil that you produce and so on. That's what a factory economy does. On the other hand, efficiency, you can improve the efficiency of your plants, of your manufacturing plants, by automation, by getting people to work with more productivity. All of that, that's your efficiency-driven economy. That takes you that far. Beyond that, you'll have to rely on innovation. And as economies grow, you'll run out of steam in terms of the GDP rates, growth rates that you can push, and eventually it'll have to grow on innovation only. Startup activity is also usually the first step in building innovation clusters. So if you want to build something like a Boston Biopharma cluster, you will see that the first starting baby steps would be by startups. And as these startups aggregate, you will end up seeing all other larger companies and everybody aggregating in those spaces. So if we want to build clusters, we do believe that startups are the way to get it started. And of course, if you want to ensure the success of science in India, I think also, and to promote science, it's important to ensure success of science-based startups. It is one of the few ways by which it provides an opportunity to contribute in areas with foresight, which many scientists want to do, right? have impact and also find fulfillment in that, right? And that is something which I think startups can help people trained in the sciences and engineering do, which these are some of the reasons why I would like to suggest that startups are important and we should be looking at them carefully. Of course, it's no, all of you would be aware that all innovation activities, research, all of that eventually gets funded through profits generated in business, be it directly or indirectly through taxes. So it's quite important that we nurture this virtuous circle if we want to nurture science and engineering in the country as well. Okay. During COVID too, it was very clear that startups will play an important role. Moderna was a startup. BioNTech was a startup. Merck's Molnupiravir were also related to a startup called Ridgeback Therapeutics. These are the global big things that you heard. In India too, you saw startups making waves. There was a company like MyLab coming up with the first RT-PCR kit, getting it approved within weeks of the announcement of lockdown. There was these last mile vaccine carriers from BlackFrog, these defibrillators from Jeeptronics, these masks from Swasa and Noka Robotics did the ventilators. The last two related to the IIT Kanpur network. So wonderful to see that startups made a big dent and they could respond with speed when it was really required. So in that context, again, in such situations, science-based startups provide that opportunity to at least be able to play the game when it's required to be played. Yeah. Okay, so what do real-world startups look like? So I've chosen a few, 4 or 5 as examples. So the first one I want to show you is something which was started by a PhD student. It's called Actorius, and it works on what is called circulating tumor cell diagnostics for cancer. And what you will find is that here was a person who was trained in the sciences, worked in the industry, and then decided that he had an idea that he could build upon and create into India's first circulating tumor cell diagnostic test approved by CDSU and implemented today in India. And of course, tested by leading hospitals, including Tata Memorial Hospital, AIIMS, and so on and so forth. So here was somebody who could visualize that future opportunity of the need for biopsy-free, solid tumor biopsy-free testing for oncology. Okay, and for cancer, and thinking that would be very important in the future, and therefore one needs to start working on it. And this is several years back. Here is another company called KB Calls, founded by 2 young PhD students from IIT-Bombay, who it's great to see that their microbial colors are today featured in the Lakme fashion show. The pictures that you see below are from the Lakme fashion show in 2022. And here, they again saw an opportunity ahead of the game for non-GMO sustainable natural biopigments, which are an alternative to some of the synthetics that are used. And this whole idea that this will become important need in the future is something they foresaw. Almost 8 years back, a company built this plant for citywide processing of food waste, municipal food waste into bio-CNG, and then getting it to run those city buses. Conceptualized this almost 8 years back. So this is again an example of foresight and being able to look ahead. Today, we can see that all the cities have a problem of waste disposal, a serious problem of waste disposal. And here is somebody who anticipated that problem coming up several years back and could respond to it with action. BioPrime is another company which I'll use a little bit more in the future, but this is an agrobiologics company which is basically seen the need to have biomolecules and not chemicals being used for plant growth, for climate resilience, and so on and so forth. So I'll talk a little bit more about it as well, right? So yet another company which is run by one more lady entrepreneur, which is focusing on autoimmune diseases, vitiligo, which is this is a therapeutics company developing new drugs, which can again, which have just now crossed phase 1 clinical trials, human clinical trials. So I'll now into the last phase. So how do you get started with your startups, right? So the how-to recipe, here are 10 steps. The first one, identify a future opportunity for impact. It should be large enough, it should be important enough. Convince yourself of the opportunity for impact and jump in. It's important you are convinced. It's not an easy journey. So you have to convince yourself first, and then assemble a whole bunch of a team, put together founders are fully committed. It's important to have fully committed lead entrepreneurial team members. Find a resourceful ecosystem and mentors to support you, and follow that by creating novel solutions, demonstrating them, building some competitive edge, figuring out the business model, showing that it is scalable, and then carrying out detailed execution plans which you are able to defend and use to tell a convincing business story that raises money, and then of course execute your business, right? So this, let's just take a quick look through using the case of BioPrime startup as an example. So here is the story of a company which I'll, of course, in the interest of brevity, I'll be just highlighting a few points, but I'll just take you through those 10 steps with BioPrime as an example, so that some of you might want to follow a similar pathway as well. So BioPrime saw that, I mean, the team, imagined a future of being able to modulate plant growth and deal with pest resistance, etc., in a future era where demand for pesticide-free and organic food will be high, and climate change-induced crop losses would also be a serious concern, right? This was something, imagine this is 2016, it was there in the horizon, but people were still debating whether some of these things are fads and people were not clear what the regulations would shape up to be, right? So there was considerable uncertainty. So this is a high-risk environment in which you're operating, but there is a vision of the future that this is going to be important, right? So that's the step 1 that I talked about, foreseeing the future, right? Following that, you convince yourself and jump in. So I know at least to my knowledge, 2 of the founders first jumped into the company. It was great that within around that time they also won the BIG from BIRAC, the Biotech Ignition Grant, which gave them some ability to deploy resources and start working on some of these things, right? So this is on the left is Chandrasekhar, and on the right is Renuka Diwan, the two of the 3 founders of the company. And money is, of course, important for first-generation entrepreneurs. It's very important to get started. This is a very busy slide. It has a map of various funding pockets available in India and for different stages. So below you will see R&D funds, proof of concept funds, seed funding, early stage, expansion, and late stage. In the past, you would have seen that only the top few arrows on the top, which is the 3 Fs, the angel, seed fund, and the venture capital and PE funds, and so on, would be the options available to entrepreneurs. And therefore, invariably, you will find that many businesses needed investment from family sources. So you would end up tapping your family and friends to start businesses. And it was very difficult for first-generation entrepreneurs. This was a barrier for first-generation entrepreneurs. And today, in some of these sectors, there are several grant funding pockets available now. And that gap in the beginning has been closed quite a bit by many different pockets of funds. So this is quite empowering for many first generation entrepreneurs and who are able to pitch for them. Of course, it's competitive, so you have to bid for it, but there are many such funds available. So one of them which you see here is the BIRAC BIG, which I talked to you about, which allowed, say, Bioprime to get started. And beyond that, of course, you have to raise money in different stages as well. As they went about, they put their team together. The first three co-founders, you can see all of them here. The third person is Amit, who joined, I think, a few months later. And they had a strong co-founding team, a team of 3 people. You can see that they branded themselves right from day one. Bioprime Agri Solutions Private Limited company was on. They, of course, they did leverage several mentors and the ecosystem locally in their own neighborhoods. But in my opinion, also sometimes being part of an extended ecosystem and incubation network is quite important, because when you're on a journey which is difficult, it's nice to meet other people who are pursuing equally ambitious and difficult journeys, and also have access to facilitating and resourceful ecosystems. And those ecosystems might provide mentoring, services, facilities, networks, events, a variety of different things, training and so on, which you wouldn't otherwise have access to. So it's good to align yourself to certain local innovation and incubation ecosystems and make the most out of it as a company that is getting started. Bioprime then came up with a bunch of novel solutions. They tried out various different solutions, pursued them, experimented with them, both in the field, in trials, in experiments, in also in sales, and to see how it was going. They went on to build IP around it. So this particular one of their platforms is called Sniper, and they have 4 patents around this platform, including several trademarks for products in this area as well. These are biologics basically for agriculture for various different applications. So you need to often also find sources of sustainable advantage. So you need to build brands, you need to build patents, you need to create barriers for entry for others as needed, so that you have a competitive edge over a period of time, and so that you're also attractive to investors to invest in. Now they had to also, as they did all this, work through their business models and their channels. They decided, of course, that they'll keep their R&D in-house, manufacturing in-house. They would want to retain their brands, but they would do sales to both direct and via distributors. They could have decided that they'll go only via distributors, or they'll do only direct sales, so on and so forth. But they decided to take a call on how they wanted to go about it with their own advisors on how they should pursue this particular business model. Following that, they needed to have detailed plans. People would ask them, what are your R&D plans? How will you manage your IP? How will you keep your formulations confidential? How will you ensure that regulations, you're aligned with regulations? I told you that there were uncertainties about regulations. So one had to work out regulations as they evolved. One had to make sure that you're aligning with it or helping shape those regulations if required. Manufacturing. What would be your manufacturing plan? What would be your marketing branding plan? What would be your pricing plan? What would be your sales channels you plan to use? The distribution agreements you would get into? How do you manage people? How do you get talent? How would you also manage your money and timing of all of this? Because all this would be critical when you're running plans. And all this would be asked, of course, by your investors as well. And all this results in telling a story, right, for your company, that you have a convincing story at the end of the day, which you tell. And when you tell a convincing story, people notice. And of course, Bioprime won several awards. They were recognized under several platforms. So I told you they started in 2016, around 2018, 19, 20, 21, they started getting recognized for their efforts. And you see here several awards, at least the pictures that I could pull out, including from industry, from industry bodies, from national bodies, and so on and so forth, and international competitions as well. And as that shaped up, it was time to also raise money and to build your company further. The first round of their funding came through support from Venture Center and BIRAC. And following that, they went on to raise money from 2 venture capital firms. Omnivore is a sector-focused early stage venture capital firm, and Inflexor is a relatively little later stage, but a follow-on VC fund, which has both of these have invested in this company now. So here you have the company evolving into a stage where investors are willing to consider the story, interrogate deeply, understand the plan, and then decide to commit resources to it because they think that this is something which, they believe in the vision and the possibilities of the founders in the business. Okay, so that was number 10. And of course, after that, they have to execute, right? So today, this is yesterday's data from Renuka that the team is at 46 people. They have 2 facilities. They have production space of about 5,000 square feet. They're producing at about 3.5 lakh liters a year. Products, there are 6 that they're focusing on. There are new product lines and IP that has emerged. Customers, there are 1 lakh unique farmers they have reached. And they have sales and distribution partners targeting 18 crops in 6 states, right? Starting from 3 people with a business plan, right? So that is what a typical startup story could look like, right? So I'll close on that note with some final, just one word of comment and advice. I told you that startups are not necessarily easy journeys. But these are high risk, high reward journeys. But it is meant for people who actually have the courage, to walk a different path. So this particular poem from Robert Frost always comes to my mind. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So all the best to all of you who wish to start up. I'm open to questions now. Thank you very much. Thank you. This is my coordinate, director@venturecenter.co.in. And the final slide is, this is a picture of Venture Center. This is the 15th year anniversary, and all of you are welcome to visit us, when you get a chance to come as well. So over to you, Mukta. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Premnath, for this wonderful session. If there are any questions, you can put in the chat box, or you can raise your hands. We will unmute you. So please feel free to raise your hands also. Do you want to add any additional comments?
If there are any questions, people are free to ask.
Bhagyashree, yeah, we are unmuting you.
Hello.
Bhagyashree, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Sir, it was very wonderful talk. I'm attending all talks from the series, and this is like the path lecture I have heard today. So now I come to my question. Sir, you mentioned 2 other funding agencies, Omnivore and Inflexor. So they provide funds to deep tech science startups, or they provide funding to service startups as well. And sir, what is the general procedure to get the funding? Can you?
Bhagyashree, those 2 were investors. Okay. Yeah. So those are venture capital firms. So they raise money from their own investors and then go ahead and invest in companies who they think can produce the returns that they need. Okay. So these are all things where you have to find out the investors who invest in your sectors, who would like the theme that you are working on, and then pitch to them, convince them that you're the best bet for them to invest in, and you have to win those investments. The grants are the first phase, but you can't rely on grants all through. You have to eventually go to investors, especially as startups. And the whole idea, one way of thinking about grants is to prepare your case well enough that investors are interested, right? So you have to develop the data that you need, get into a point where your technology is fairly developed, IP is set up and all of that. And then, it becomes more interesting to investors, and they understand it better in terms of how to, in terms of how that business could succeed. As far as funding information sources are concerned, Venture Center has a database called funding.venturecenter.co.in. It has a database of several grant sources, so you can use any of those. You're welcome to just browse them. It's a free database, right? And this is for many, this is for across all Indian sources. And as far as investors are concerned, there are multiple ways to go about it, but that's a little more detailed discussion. One needs to actually research a little bit on which investor will be interested in which sector at which stage of the company, right? And what are their expectations and what you want us to do as a founder of a company.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
There's one more question from Deepak. He asks, what should one do to ensure that we effectively connect the ecosystem enabled by VC and similar local or city ecosystem? How do we ensure that we find the right collaborators? How do we stay in touch with the new happenings in the ecosystem, especially the local ones, which is more likely to be beneficial?
Yeah. So, first of all, of course, there are mailing lists in every incubator. There are Twitter handles. There are, all the social media handles which you can easily track. So I think first thing is to get information on that, right? So Venture Center, for example, puts out all its announcements. We run more than 200 plus events a year, and all of those are put out online or through the social media channels. All our talks are free, so you're free to attend them as well. And you can be anywhere in the world. Many of them are online as well. And like, for example, all these will be recorded and be available on YouTube as well, the current videos. So that's one way to do it, okay? But one other thing, there are a few more things which you should look at. One is you should just request an appointment and go and meet people. Just go and talk to people about your ideas. In Venture Center, for example, there's an incubation and mentoring team which does the first round of discussions. They do welcome people who have business ideas. Only yesterday, a young undergrad student pitched a business idea to us, and we listened to her. Right? So nothing wrong. You should just send your requests and see how it can be taken ahead. There are more ways. In Pune and other such places, there are local networks also. For example, there's a network of entrepreneurs called the Indus Entrepreneurs, the Thai network. If you're in the IT space, you'll find, for example, the Pune Open Coffee Club meetings happening, which Venture Center is hosting right now, but it's an independent group, Pune Open Coffee Club, which meets. So you can go and check up those networks and be part of that. They also do very interesting work. There's Pune, there's Startup Saturday, there's Head Start, there is Pune, there's also Startup Leadership Program. So there are several such networks depending upon your interest groups. So if you're lost, you can just come and talk to people who are in that network or anybody. There are now, I heard, 700 incubators in the country. So I'm sure there are, and in Pune itself, there must be at least 10, 15 or so. So you should be able to meet at least one of them to talk to them. They must be nearby as well. Is he from Pune?
This is Deepak Bhosle.
Deepak. Okay, yes. Yeah, so and of course, once you're in a network of an incubator, you will keep getting more connects within the incubator as well, incubator networks, right? So I hope that answered your question, Deepak. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, no. So the next question is on, you've already spoken about some of the funding options and probably they can talk to the incubation and mentoring team. This question from Gautam Tulsi, who wants to have inputs on funding options for deep tech startups. Gautam, you feel free to write back to us and we can have a detailed discussion offline on the different funding options that as startups or innovators you can avail.
Let me just repeat that. You should look up funding.venturecenter.co.in, right? A lot of the grant funding options are listed there. Another variety of funding options are available over there. It is quite an easy database to use. And if you have some sector specific requests, you can connect, as Mukta said, with incubator managers. They are the best people to point you to the right one, and then they'll also be able to point you to local options. For example, some incubators will have access to some CSR funding, which they might be deploying, which you will come to know better if you talk to the incubators. They can also tell you about future calls, forward calls. We know roughly we'll know when the next calls might be coming out in some of these other programs.
Yeah. There are two more questions. The first one being from Meghna. She says, you mentioned something about convincing yourself and jumping in. Any tips on how to go about that role? Some tend to get obsessed over an idea and do not realize that it might actually not be viable. So how do you gather feedback and at the same time be open to accepting that feedback over your idea?
Yeah, so one general principle in any kind of technology development and innovation and entrepreneurship activity is that you don't try to get 100% definitive answer on day one. Okay, so what that means is that you will never have a situation where you have, or you'll rarely have a situation where you will have a definitive answer at any given point. What you do is you take an idea, if it interests you, you progress it a little further, within the cost that you are able to manage, reasonable cost for you. And by the way, that varies from person to person. Somebody can afford to do more, somebody can afford to do less, right? And progress it further till it convinces you some bit, then convinces you more, and so on and so forth. So it is always a process of pushing an idea far enough to become convincing, right? And please remember that all these people who have bet on a particular idea must have gone through that, right? And in the very beginning, most people would have faced everybody telling them that it's a bad idea or a foolish idea, and only one or two people would have stuck up to it, right? And in most cases, you can even imagine that may not have even looked very promising. So for example, if you think of the earliest days of Amazon and you think of, say, selling books online, if you could just erase your today's world out of your mind for a moment, that would look like a business which many people might think is trivial, right? Selling books. Okay, you would not think it is exciting, right? So it is a matter of progressing an idea and convincing yourself progressively that this is a great idea. Okay, so it doesn't happen in one shot, first of all, but you have to be convinced enough to progress it, okay, to work on it long enough to get it to a point to shape it. So it's like polishing a diamond. You don't really realize what it is until you can actually polish it for long enough, right? So that is another catch for many people. So most people, first of all, try to get a definitive answer in the very beginning, which is a mistake either way. On one side, you might miss good ideas. Another side, you might be, you might pursue an idea endlessly. That's also possible without trying to generate that data as you go along, right? So this has been taught in many different ways nowadays in the business literature. So even what they call as lean startup is a way of experimenting continuously to figure out progressively whether it works or not. So I would suggest that that is a good approach to convincing yourself as well that it's a good business idea. And very often we also tend to exaggerate our potential loss. That's another reason why people hesitate getting into some of these activities. For them, say, trying something for 1 year and losing out on it or not progressing sounds like a big loss to them. If you imagine that way, you will never get started, right? So it is also a matter of progressively convincing yourself without exaggerating your potential loss.
So the next question is about your comments on entering a space which is getting saturated. Say for waste management, there will always be a competition between fuel versus fiber. So is it wise to still opt for fiber?
Fiber. Okay, so okay, let's. So first of all, this issue of getting things getting saturated is a given area. If you just zoom up a little bit to a different level and look at it, it doesn't appear saturated. Okay, whether it is a fuel of a certain kind, like a fossil fuel of a certain kind, or it is, say, renewable energy coming through the wires or whatever it is, right? The debate is only about that. Nobody is arguing that fuels, that energy is going to be an important requirement, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. That means any given field, it is a matter of perspective on finding the gold mine out there, right? So when you talk about energy, even when you're talking about fuel and say fiber, imagine if tomorrow nuclear fusion happens, right? It's going to wipe both of these out, right? There'll be no need for any other source of energy except nuclear fusion, right? So it's never a given, right? And there is nothing which actually saturates. Technologies get to a plateau and then the next wave begins, right? So it's sort of it's a wave. It's like an inflection point, and the next big development happens in the field in that particular area. So that's how I look at it. So if you're an innovator, what I would suggest is to keep your mind open for various possibilities and don't shoot them down too early. Okay, that is not required. The typical principle is to let many of them flourish to a point and see which one wins out. Sometimes things win out not because they're the best technical solution, but because of various other factors, and that can also may not be under your control. Okay, so these are some important points to keep in mind. I don't know if I answered your question, but which is what I have to comment right now.
Yeah. So next question is from Julie. She wants to know the criteria for early stage applicants for selecting them either from Venture Center or from BIRAC. Julie, I hope you attended our session today in the morning, which was around the upcoming VIG call. This was at 11 o'clock, and if you have not done so, the recording will be available. We can share the link with you. But I leave this thing to Dr. Premnath to add any additional comments on this.
So as far as funding programs are concerned, especially grant funding programs, you need to understand first where the funding is coming from. If it is coming from any pocket of funds related to the Ministry of Science and Technology, which could be BIRAC, which could be Department of Science and Technology, or any other source, DSIR, whatever, you will find that they will have an emphasis on science-based ideas and novelty being important. Okay, because the money is not being given to run any business. It is being given so that you take technology risk, right? Which is one category of high risk businesses, right? So novelty becomes an important factor in those kind of funding pockets. If the funding pocket was, say, from another source like the Ministry of MSME, that may or may not be important. Okay, they are just giving you to support a micro and small medium enterprise, right? So that is different kind of a pocket of fund. So this factor you can keep in mind. But the other thing also to keep in mind is people think that all grants are equal. It's not. Typically, the government gives more money to not-for-profits. It's relatively rare or lesser in number to for-profits. Okay, so the startup kind of grants are usually only for innovation financing. That means it is meant to finance innovation, not necessarily basic research, not necessarily activity. Okay, so those other considerations you have to keep in mind. So when you pitch a presentation, when you give your application, you have to present the case of what is new and how it can become a business, and why is the government interested in you building a business. Because eventually when you build a business, it will create useful products and services for society. It will earn revenues for the country. That revenue will result in taxes for the government. Okay, and you create jobs, and those jobs will pay salaries, and those salaries will end up in again taxes for the government. Okay, so please keep that in mind. So you have to convey how you're going to do all that, not necessarily just that I'm going to do great science out here. That doesn't cut it, right? So that is for your funding pitches. Other typical eligibility things are very simple. They will ask you for typically most of these are only for ownership of their entity, or the person's nationality has to be, nationality has to be Indian, or the ownership has to be more than 51% Indian. In startups, typically private limited company or LLPs, we normally tell people go with private limited company because investors won't touch a LLP. And besides that, there are some criteria which are specific to different funding programs. So I won't get into those.
Yeah. So there's a raised hand there. AKC, you can unmute yourself. I'm sorry, I don't know your full name, but that is what we see here on the screen. Yeah, you must. Are you able to unmute, AKC? Okay, meanwhile, we'll take one question from Bhagyashree.
Hello. Yeah, is it audible?
Yeah, we can hear.
So good evening, Dr. Premnath. It's Chakravarti from Scientist.
Hello. Yeah, please tell.
Hi. So actually, like listening to your talks is always a pleasure, and I definitely try to listen them. So here there are a lot of things to discuss. Just two things I want to say. One is a question, and another is just a small comment. So first question I will ask, that is is it possible to go for that agile development system in deep tech? That is question number one. Okay. And then just a small comment, but I'll just like to share when some people ask about like how to decide that whether I am right or wrong. I'll just share one of my experience when I started my entrepreneurship. The problem is that when we start into our entrepreneurial journey, so we are taking our sarpa drishti, but a good business simultaneously requires sarpa drishti and giddha drishti. Isn't it so? So sarpa drishti and giddha drishti quite often, like however good a person is, but owning both the drishtis is very difficult. So I say that it is better if you have a mentor who will just look at have the giddha drishti, and then the startup works on the sarpa drishti. I made a lot of mistakes in my startup because I didn't get any person I wanted, but I didn't get any person who could give the giddha drishti.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all.
Yeah. So I think his first question was about
like whether we can go for
lean
agile
startups,
development,
agile methodology. Yes. So first of all, when you talk about deep tech, it spans a very wide range of types of technologies and startups, right? Yeah. So agile typically refers to being able to meet certain functional requirements of a prototype and go to your customer, get your inputs, come back, improve it, and so on and so forth in very quick iterations, right? Right. Now that typically, I think it is possible in deep tech as well, but not in all sectors. So for example, if you're going to do a medtech product, you clearly cannot do it, right? Because you cannot go and try it out on people unless you have approvals and so on. But you may be able to still get feedback. Some elements of that you can get feedback from the potential users without necessarily putting it to use, right?
Okay.
That we still do, right? So even in medtech, for example, you need to just, I think, in what you learn in Agile, you need to interpret it slightly differently in deep tech. So a good example of this is, for example, the Stanford Biodesign program. So what they do is they call the first phase of their development involves clinical immersions. So they first go to the users, right, to figure out what exactly is needed. And as they keep prototyping later, they will keep getting continuous feedback from the users, okay, or in that case, surgeons, right? But not necessarily in, say, it's not like a medical implant, but it might be an instrument of some kind getting feedback without causing any harm, right? So it's slightly interpreted differently and utilized, but the general principle that you must talk to your users and customers early still applies. Okay, and rapid iterations is also a good idea before you invest too much into it. So I think it is a good idea. It is not applicable in the same way as software technology, no doubt about it. Okay. The second question which you talked about, I think, I like to call it telescoping. Sometimes you have to zoom in, sometimes you have to zoom out. Okay? Right. And this, some people are good at, some others are not. It of course hurts when you cannot do it very well. By the way, to some degree, I also believe every entrepreneur should learn how to do that, because you will often find that entrepreneurs who tend to zoom in too much cannot convey the larger picture of the opportunity. They also cannot see the larger picture of having the larger picture that you need to see when you build teams, when you invest in certain things, right? They sometimes can be too narrowly focused on smaller objectives, right? And they miss the big picture. On the other hand, people who are just high level may never get into the details of the technology and so on. So you're right that it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's a good idea to have a mentor or a partner, or construct a team in such a way that people have different capabilities, right? And that is a useful thing to do. So yes, I agree with you. There should be people who should be zooming in. They should be zooming out. They need not all be team members. They can also be advisors and mentors. But good idea to have them.
Yeah. That's good, because otherwise, normally what happens that your confirmation bias sets in.
Yeah.
If the same person is working on the ground and looking from the top, confirmation bias sets in.
Yeah, you're right. There need to be people who ask you difficult questions, right? But at the same time, there is a certain merit in startup entrepreneurs being a little arrogant also. They have to stand up to their ideas. Okay? Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
There's one last question. I think partially you address this. Bhageshri wants to know how does an early stage startup focus on efficiency? So I think when you spoke about lean methodology.
Yeah, so efficiency refers to being able to utilize your resources extremely well in terms of how you deploy it and so on, I suppose, right? Time and so on. But it's a double-edged sword also. Okay, I know you are low on resources at that time when you're a startup. So you need to manage your resources well. But at the same time, you can also see the negative effects of too much efficiency or efforts to build efficiency in larger companies. So very often efficiency is also the devil in terms of killing creativity, right? So if you want to try out and fail, if you try to be over efficient, it hurts you. Right. So there's one more observation, which is that if you want to if you if you want to have if you're very concerned about efficiency, you may be overvaluing the resources also. Okay, what I mean by that is, imagine a startup entrepreneur who places a very high value on their time. Okay, in which case they will be extremely stingy about their time, so they might not network. Okay, they may not invest enough efforts in their team members, right? They may not invest enough efforts in doing other things, and consequently it has a negative effect on the company. A simple extreme example would be, imagine if you were working for an MNC and your job was, you were earning 50 lakhs a year. Now quitting that to do a startup with zero earnings would be a big blow for you, right? And you would think, in a way it's inefficient use of your time, right? But the thing is, you are aiming for something more, right? So you have to think a little carefully about how you want to be efficient in a startup environment. That said, every startup has to be very careful about how it utilizes money, but it has to use it effectively without sort of not being penny wise and pound foolish. Okay, but more deployed smartly, right? And that is very key to most startups. That's the answer that I can give you right now. So we can talk more later, Vagish. Okay, I think with that we're done, right?
Yes,
okay.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Pleasure.
So we will close on the links also which people have requested. We will send it to them to you separately over email. And please do remember to fill up the feedback form before you log off this session, because that helps us to incorporate your suggestions. So we will meet you today, tomorrow, next time again on 20th of December for the next talk, which is on only FTO. So thank you so much for joining us, and meet you soon.
Thank you.